couple of months, we've been looking at this series called Entangled and looking at particularly the book of Hebrews, this book that is both inspiring and confronting and mysterious and clears things up and all that sort of stuff. So we've had a look at some of that. We will never get to all of it in a short series, but I encourage you to read the book of Hebrews, because it's a really great outlaying of why Jesus is better. And we've looked at that throughout the whole of the time. But today we kind of wrap up that series and then move into other things next week. But to do that, I want to bring you a word of encouragement from Hebrews chapter 12. And they're words that hopefully you know. If you're a person who is a Christ follower, you know these words as words of encouragement. And we're going to get to those words in just a moment in time. The key phrase that we're looking at today is this one, that we're to lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set out before us. And so that analogy or that imagery of a race is the one that we want to keep in mind. Despite the condition of our knees or our hips or our lungs or whatever it might be, we are called to keep on running and to be part of the kingdom of God. And so we're going to untangle a bit of that today and see where it is that if we find that encouragement to keep on going, particularly when it's tough to run, particularly when it's tough to continue on. Well, 40 years ago, it was 1983. There you go. What a profound way to start. But in 1983, a very important sporting event happened in the life of this country. It was the rise of a very unlikely hero. In 1983, Australia hosted what's now known as an ultra marathon. You remember ultra marathons? They weren't just marathons, these were ultra marathons. And this ultra marathon was 875 kilometres long from Sydney to Melbourne 40 years ago. And these people would gather and they would run it. And it was called an ultra marathon. Now, it brought rise to an unlikely hero. Now, some of us who were around then, most of us, know this unlikely hero. Who's that? Cliffy Young. Cliff Young. Does that ring a bell? Cliff Young. And he became a national hero for those who are under the age of 40. He became a national hero. He was on Bert Newton's show, and he was on the Idea, New Idea, No Idea, whatever they call that magazine. All those things, he was on it. And the legend of Cliff Young was quite amazing. In fact, a couple of years ago, they put out a movie about his life, simply called Cliffy. Because everybody knows in the vernacular who this guy was. If you're new to Australia, this guy was an absolute hero. Now, he was 61 years old when he entered this race. He was a sheep herder, and shortly before he began the race, wearing these overalls and galoshes over his boots, he walked up to the registration table of this ultra marathon to register for this race. And the people at the registration table literally laughed out loud. They thought it was a joke. This 61-year-old guy who was fairly unimpressive physically wanted to enter this race. But Cliffy Young said, I really want to enter this race. So the race began, and Cliff Young ran with this kind of awkward, sort of goofy-looking shuffle, the Cliffy Shuffle, which I can only manage now. And he had all these kind of weird things about him. Not many people knew him, but for the next 5 days, 14 hours and 4 minutes, he ran. At 1:25 a.m. in the morning, Cliff Young shuffled across the finish line of that ultra marathon. He had won this race against all these other people who were seasoned ultra marathon runners. He became this instant hero in Australia. They discovered some facts about Cliff Young, that he primarily lived on pumpkin seeds and water. But that wasn't the secret of his victory. The secret of his victory wasn't his diet or his shuffling style. Nobody could kind of figure it out. And so after they interviewed him, they discovered that Cliffy Young had done something different to all the other ultra marathon runners that day. His secret was that he didn't sleep. All the other marathon runners were used to the fact that they would run 16 to 18 hours and then they would go to sleep for 4 hours, get somewhat renewed and run again. Cliffy Young didn't know this, so he just kept on running through the night. While they were sleeping, he was running. And he shuffled his way to victory without ever sleeping. He enjoyed that 5 days, 14 hours and 4 minutes, non-stop at the age of 61. He won because he kept on running all the way to the finish line. And it was such an inspiring story. So if you have that on whatever channels you have on, it's a great story to sit down and watch with your kids, particularly that movie. Well, the 12th chapter of Hebrews compares the Christian life to a race. And it gives us wisdom on how to not only get in the running, but to stay in the running, even when we want to kind of do what Forrest Gump did and just stop. Therefore, we're surrounded, the Bible says, by such a great cloud of witnesses. Let us throw everything that hinders and the sin that so easily ensnares us, and let us run with perseverance the race that is marked out for us. And what a great way to kind of finish this series by looking at this great word of encouragement. The next verse says in verse 2, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set out before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So to kind of wrap up this series, I want to look at this great encouragement and to encourage you to keep on running. No matter what might be around you or in your life, the encouragement to keep running, because the writer here gives us some tools that will help us to keep running. Because we're not expected to just run forever by ourselves. And that brings me to the very first kind of encouragement point, this point that we can access to keep running this Christian life. And that's this. We need to learn and relearn from runners who have run before. Who's the guy in the middle there? Number 41. Does anybody know? That guy's Sir Roger Bannister. You heard that name? Roger Bannister, not the guy with the glasses, the second guy. And Roger Bannister is famous for being the first person that we know of, in fact, who broke the 4-minute mile barrier. Okay, for decades, well, up until then, no one had ever recorded anybody running a mile in under 4 minutes, and defied all of the experts why people could not do that. And in fact, many of the experts said it was actually humanly impossible to do so. In fact, if anybody went that far, their heart would explode. That was the great sports science of those days. But they believed that it would only, if it was in fact possible, it would only be possible under the precise conditions, weather-wise, that would make it possible. But Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile on a very cold, wet track in a small athletics meeting in Oxford, England. There was just a few thousand people there. When Roger Bannister broke this mark, it made worldwide news. And even the most ardent rivals breathed a kind of a sigh of relief, because at last somebody had broken the 4-minute mile. This was a big thing in athletics back in those days. But a strange thing happened after Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile. Just 46 days after Bannister's great feat, an Australian guy called John Landy, who some of you may remember, not only broke the barrier again, but he broke it with a time of 3 minutes and 58 seconds. So he took a second or so off Bannister's time. This is only a month later or so. Then, in just a year, another 3 runners broke the 4-minute mile in a single race. And over the last half century, more than 1,000 people have broken that barrier. In fact, the latest count, I looked this up last night, is 2,500 people have broken a record that nobody thought would ever be broken. Now, why do you think that is? Because they saw somebody like Roger Bannister do it, you see. And when we think of our faith, the example of other people running the race is a great source of encouragement and skill to us. It enables us, when we feel discouraged and feel like dropping out of the race, we remember the runners who have run the race before. We need to remember the people who didn't give up, who pushed on, who pushed through. We need to remember how they ran the race and why they ran the race. That's why when you come to church and we worship God together, there is a sense of realignment. Oh, that's right, this is why I believe what I believe. This is why I'll take another step, as hard as that might be in our spirit at times. Verse 1 says that since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us run with perseverance the race that is marked out for us. Now, the book of Hebrews in the previous chapter is called the kind of heroes of faith chapter. I'd encourage you to read it in chapter 11 of the book of Hebrews. It just cites person after person after person after person who have run the race of faith. And they're all from down there and all of that, and we know that. You know, the word clouds is very interesting. In Greek, there's two words for clouds. I'm sure you came to church to hear them, didn't you? Yeah, that's right. One of them is nephele, it means a small kind of detached, sharply outlined cloud. It's like a little cloud in the sky. The other word for cloud in Greek is nephos, which means a mass of cloud. Well, nephos is the word that is used here, this great cloud of witnesses. So it's not just a little dot in the corner, it is an overwhelming amount of cloud. And we have such a massive cloud of witnesses stretching right back to the very origins of our faith, right through 2,000 some years, that we can look to and get encouragement from. People who have run the race, people who have continued, who have completed their race, who have finished. People who have had faith even when their circumstances cried out to stop. This great mass of clouds. And you have a list that will go on the cloud as well. Somebody was trying to explain to me the cloud, you know, the Apple cloud. Does anybody understand that? I don't know. I had a conversation with Mike Ashford, who's not here today. I said to him, can you explain the cloud? And he went, yes. And after 20 minutes, I said, stop, Mike. I just can't take it in. I don't know where it is. I just hope that my document that I sent by my phone through my Retina or whatever it is in the little box there as I turn it on. The cloud, we don't understand the cloud, but we have a great cloud of witnesses that we do understand. And we have a list on that cloud. I have a list on that cloud of people who have inspired me and encouraged me and shown me that you can run, that you can move through things, you can get to the other side. Sometimes in life it's tempting to be like the prophet Elijah in the Old Testament and crawl into our caves of discouragement. Do you have a cave of discouragement? You heard about men caves? There's a cage of discouragement. Elijah was famous for saying, Lord, am I the only one who's really following you? Am I the only one who is keeping the faith? Well, Hebrews 12 tells us, no, you're not alone when you choose to align your life with God and live by faith. We watch the news and it makes us feel that faith is not going to overcome the world, that God is silent and inactive, if in fact he does believe, it does exist. We all go through those kind of doubts and second-guessing stuff and all that. Well, we need to remember that we have fellowship with every time we serve in God's name with this cloud of witnesses who go before us. Some of us whom we have lost in recent days, but we haven't lost them because we know where they are. You can't lose anybody when you know where they are. And fundamentally, we Christians believe that when we die, we go and join this great cloud of witnesses. That's comforting, isn't it? It's not just comforting for us, it's the difference for us. One of the early church fathers, a guy called Polycarp, who was a bishop in a place called Smyrna, and he was once in the Colosseum of Rome under the persecution of the early church, and the voice of, this is not him, this is an idea of what it might look like, they were about to burn him to death at the stake for his faith in Jesus. And famously, the emperor of Rome cried out, Polycarp, renounce your Christ or you shall die. And Polycarp was heard to have said, Caesar, accept my Christ and you shall live. Now, that's not just a good throwaway line. That line cost him his life. Millions and millions followed. Don't you ever, and don't I ever think that we are alone when we are people of faith. When we walk by faith and not by sight, we join this procession of every age of the church, of those who have believed, who have staked even their very lives that God is worthy of it all, no matter what the cost. Somebody gave me this book recently called The Oxford Martyrs. I love getting books, so keep them coming, that's great. The Oxford Martyrs, and it's very interesting about the time in the middle 1500s of this group of people who became martyrs for their faith. This didn't just happen back in Roman times. There are people who are martyred today and will be today for their faith. Anyway, in this story, in 1531, a guy called Thomas Bilney was burned at the stake because he convinced that every person in the world should be able to read the scriptures. That's what he was willing to die for. That they would have the right to open the Bible and read it for themselves. Not just to hear it in Latin from some person up the front, but they would be able to open the Bible and they would be able to read the scriptures. It's a timely reminder, isn't it, when we are flippant with the scriptures? Because the Bible brings such access to what God is all about. Anyway, Thomas Bilney was burned at the stake because he was convinced that every person should be able to have the right to read the scriptures. And watching in the crowd the day that he was burned to death was a guy called Hugh Latimer. And Latimer looked at Bilney and his witness and decided that he wanted to find out something this man would die for. Cut a long story short, Hugh Latimer ended up becoming a Christ follower, a Christian, and eventually became an archbishop. Bloody Mary came to the throne, and many, many were martyred. And Hugh Latimer was one of those. And his co-worker and friend, another archbishop, an archbishop called Ridley, when they were burned at the stake, Latimer looked at Ridley and said, "Be of good cheer, Master Ridley, for today a light of flame in England will light that no one will ever be able to put out." One to another, another to another, to another to another. Now, these are extreme examples of people being burned to death and in other ways for their faith. But we gain encouragement when we are discouraged, but we gain encouragement when we are mocked. We gain encouragement when we are scorned at or sneered at. We gain encouragement when we're considered fools or considered idiots or considered intellectually not quite right. We gain encouragement because of all those others who have passed before us. We learn from the runners who have run before us. So let us run our race. In a little while, we'll look at some other aspects that we can run our race with endurance, and we can be the kind of people that God has called us to be. Well, we continue on with this perseverance, and there's a couple of other things that help us to run. That first thing is looking at the runners who have run before. They inspire us and also give us great real life lessons of how to live this life in lots of different ways. So it's a good thing that we do that. There's another thing about sort of a running tip, and it comes a little bit later on in that passage. It comes in the first verse of that passage, but it's sort of reiterated throughout. And the second half of that says, let us throw off all those hindrances and sins that so easily ensnare us or entangle us. This version says every weight and sin. They're two different things that we've got to look at. But we need to think of the imagery that brings to those first century readers in the book of Hebrews. In the first century, when runners came into the stadium where the games were held, this is part of their custom, they would enter wearing usually long flowing robes. And just right before the race would begin, those runners would disrobe. They would discard those robes, the Nike robes and the Adidas robes and all that, and then they would start the race. Now, there's a simple reason that they did that, because then they could run without the hindrance or the entanglements of those robes. And to a certain extent, modern runners do that too. They come in their tracksuits and their whatever their warm-up gear, and they disrobe, and they wear as aerodynamically, if that's the right word, gear as they can, so that they can have a best possible chance of winning and finishing the race. In the Christian life, we have things that impede us and slow us down. We have these weights that sometimes we engage with, and they're not necessarily bad things. They're just things that hinder our spiritual progress, where we get a little out of balance or a lot out of balance, where we major on things that are minor and minor on things that are major. It's as if the devil has switched the price tags of our world. The things that are not important at all become important, and the things that are really important become less important. And so part of the Christian journey and part of worship and fellowship and church is to realign those priorities. To say, we can have those things, but they have to be those things rather than the thing. There is outright sin as well, and the writer says that it does entangle us. It can't stop the race for the strongest runner, or it can stop the race for the strongest runner, and it can cause any runner to kind of stop in their tracks or even run a different race. I was telling our group the other day that one of the highlights of my kids' childhood, my boys particularly, is the day that I came home with a Venus flytrap. If you've ever been around kids, they love this stuff. Now, this is going to get a bit gross for a couple of minutes, so hang on. But the Venus flytrap was the best thing. We were talking the other day about their kids. They said one of the best things was when you brought those Venus flytraps home. It was not a good time to be a fly or a bug in the Reed household during this particular chapter. I was we were recounting this story. Anyway, I read a little bit about these fly traps recently, as you do, and the method of it's really quite gross, but really quite fun. Is that right? Sorry, can I say that? No Buddhists in the room? Okay, good. A fly lands on one of those levers and it tastes one of the glands that grow there. This is how these things work. And instantly these finger-like hairs bend over and touch the fly or the bug's wings, holding it in that sort of sticky place. But the method is that the more the fly struggles, you're getting all this? The more the fly struggles to get free, the more it struggles, the more it gets coated with this sticky adhesive. Soon the fly then relaxes. But it's to its fly's mind, if they have minds, it's worse, because then they get more firmly attached. When the fly is entirely at the plant's mercy, the edges of the leaf fold forward and closed. 2 hours later, the fly is an empty, sucked skin. And the hungry fist unfolds its delectable mouth for yet another easy entanglement in the Reed household. My kids love that. But it's not a bad picture of the way sin works. It'll be terrible. Wouldn't it suck to have a pastor as a father? And that, well, I do. But everything becomes a sermon illustration. But sin looks good. It entices. It attracts. It ensnares. It's the sin that so easily entangles us or ensnares us. But before we know it, we've stopped running. And the sin that most easily gets us, it's in our grip. The old translations talk about besetting sins. It's like our favourite sin, particular and peculiar to us. And the things that you might struggle with are maybe not the things I struggle with. The things I struggle with are maybe not the things you struggle with. So we'll play a game called What is Your Besetting Sin? You ready? No, we won't do that. That'd be really embarrassing. When you feel the nervousness of people go up there. Everybody on my right and left. Whatever it is, and you know what it is. I know what it is. Whatever it is, get rid of it. That's the Bible's counsel. Get rid of it. And if you can't get rid of it by yourself, which is highly likely, then do something about getting rid of it. And like the robes of those runners, remove it and leave it behind. If it's an entanglement, Stop it. Say, this is more important than that. That's maybe important, but it's not as important as that. A hindrance may not be a sin outright. It might be something that weighs you down spiritually. It could be a neutral thing in itself, but our attachment to it takes us away from what is most important. It fills out our calendars so much that we don't have any time to run. We don't have any time to worship. We don't have any time to community. We don't have time to serve, and away we go. In verses 4 to 6, it says this same thing. In your struggle against sin. So it assumes that all of us are going to struggle, okay? None of us are perfect. That's one of our values, yeah? In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood, because persecution was a real live option for these people. And have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son? It says, my son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines those whom he loves, and he chastens those, or everyone, he accepts as a son. Now you can put the word daughter in there as well. And that leads to the second thing. I won't go on too much about this, but we need to remember our coach's training. We need to remember our coach's training. In the same way that a runner must remember the things that his or her coach taught them about how to move, all that sort of stuff, we move forward on our journey of faith, remembering the things that God has said. That's why we do make a big deal of the Bible around here, because the Bible is our coach's manual, if you like, the instruction book on how to run. Part of the coaching advice the writer reminds us of is the fact that God disciplines us when we need it. Many times discipline is given to keep us staying even in the race. And we don't understand all of that, but we accept it because we believe that God loves us. In verse 9 to 11 it says, we all have these human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. Well, in best circumstances, hopefully so. How much more should we submit to the Father's discipline and live? And then it says this verse that is the parent's favourite verse when they discipline their children, and the child's least favourite verse when they're undergoing discipline. No discipline seems pleasant at the time. Would you agree? Who wants to wake up and be disciplined? But painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. So we need to remember our coach's training, and the coach will discipline us for our betterment. Here's the third sort of help, and that is the encouragement of others. Hebrews is filled with admonitions for Christians or runners to run together. Let us not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, all the more as we see the day drawing near. We were never designed to be lone runners. We were designed to help each other run. In verse 14 and 15 it has this great passage where it says, make every effort to live at peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness no one will even see the Lord. And see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up and causes trouble and defiles many. So peace and unity is not just something we want to sing about and celebrate. It's something that actually helps us all run better and further. Peace and unity, folks, takes effort. It takes energy. It takes accountability. It sometimes takes pain. But it is something that each of us do our part in. Many drop out of the Christian race towards Christ's likeness because of conflict in the community of faith. You have relatives, I have relatives, you have friends, I have friends, you have acquaintances, I have acquaintances who say, I believe in God, I get all the Jesus thing, but the whole church thing is just so toxic that I cannot be there. Now, people say that sometimes with very good reason. But we're called to make every effort, not some effort, not a little effort, or leave the effort to someone else. We are supposed to make the effort, every effort, to live at peace with everyone, so that a bitter root doesn't grow up amongst us and in us. It's very easy in Christian life to have a bitter root somewhere in our system here. I reread a portion of one of my favourite books by J.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, and in the first volume of that trilogy, in the story, these God-fearing elves join with the God-fearing dwarves, and they are opposed to the evil Dark Lord, and they begin to quarrel amongst themselves. It's sort of a picture of the church. Then one of the wiser of that company, a guy called Haldir, says these words. He says, "Indeed, in nothing is the power of the Dark Lord more clearly shown than in the estrangement that divides all those who still oppose him." That's a very rich, wordy way to say, make every effort to live at peace with each other. Now, I know that you will disagree, I will disagree, I will annoy, you will annoy. We will get into conflict, we will get into disagreements about all kinds of different things. But even in our disagreements, we are to make every effort, not to be right, not to prove the other one wrong, but to maintain and to live the peace that God has called us to bring. And you know, by that will be of greater witness than any program we can run or any event that we can put on. No energy for effort towards unity is wasted effort. Here's the last thing. We need to keep our eyes on the finish line. In verse 2 and 3 it says these great words. Let us run with perseverance the race that's marked out for us. So our race is not everybody else's race particularly. It is in terms of Christ, but that might take a little difference in nuance. Let's fix our eyes on Jesus, who is the pioneer or perfecter or author of our faith. We must run with endurance this race that is marked out for us. How do we do that? We keep our eyes on the prize. We major on the major things and we minor on the minor things. And we encourage each other to do the same. If we have our eyes fixed on a personality or a particular ism or a particular focus, we will always steer off course. Because people will let us down. Because guess what, folks? People are like other people. They are imperfect. They are not the ones that we are following. We are following Jesus, who must increase as we decrease. Always be suspicious of any ministry where Jesus decreases and the person explaining Jesus increases. Always be suspicious of that, because it's pointing us to a different prize. So let's run with endurance this race that is marked out for us. Now I know, and you know, that many of you, even in this room today, have been and are going through some very difficult paths. Some of that is with health, some of that is with loss, some of that is with all kinds of different things. And some of us are struggling in our race. And that's okay, because that's part of the race. Can I just encourage you to keep running, to don't lose heart. I know the world around us seems like, well, the world around us. But this gospel we have is still the gospel that saved our lives. It is still the gospel that we ought not to be ashamed of, because it changed the way that not only we live, but potentially those who accept it will live. So keep his example in mind. Ask for help. Keep enduring. Keep running. Keep pursuing the goal of becoming like Christ and finishing the race. Don't be like Cliff Young. Sleep and rest, but finish the race.